Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, my name is Erin Axelrod, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy. I am joined today by Mike Strode. Mike is a writer, urban cyclist, facilitator, and solidarity economy organizer with the Kola Nut Collaborative residing in Southeast Chicago. The Kola Nut Collaborative is Chicago's only time-based service and skills exchange, otherwise known as a time bank, providing an open platform for mutual aid, community organizing, and network weaving. The collaborative develops programming to support Chicago-based organizers in facilitating non-monetary exchange networks through practices like the Offers and Needs Market. Mike is a program manager at Open Collective Foundation and serves on the boards of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, the New Economy Coalition, South Deering Manor Community Association, and Dill Pickle Food Co-op. And Mike, I'm so grateful that you're willing to join us on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be a guest here.
So would love for you to share, how did you get into this work?
Well, I will say that there's no small part that the show played in my curiosity and my learning. So I definitely want to give credit to just listening to episodes of the show early on and really hearing other people that I was inspired by, that I was curious about, that I really wanted to understand and engage with this particular idea in this world of solidarity economy or next economy. But my most immediate origin point goes back to Healthy Food Hub and a space called Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living, where some of the folks that I was mentored by, Dr. Jafunza Wright Carter and Baba Fred Carter, were engaging in this idea around Black communities being able to grasp the ideas of permaculture and also those ideas not necessarily being made accessible to those communities in really culturally grounded ways. And so they initiated this space called the Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living back in 2005. And I met them in 2008. And, initially I was just redeveloping the website for Black Oaks. But that redevelopment of the website led to my deeper curiosity about Black Oaks and about permaculture. And that would lead me to help them develop something called the Healthy Food Hub out of a school that my daughter attended called Betty Shabazz International Charter School. And so the combination of that experience from 2008 forward on to about 2017, when I concluded some of my work there, was really helping me to build an ecosystem analysis, helping me connect to a sense of environmentalism and ecology that was uniquely and culturally grounded also in Blackness. And it allowed me to really think about the type of world that I wanted to live in, the type of world that I wanted to experience and engage in. And really, that was what nudged me to begin thinking about other ideas like time banking, like cooperatives, and really begin exploring and just expanding out into those ideas a bit more. So that's the most immediate catalyst for the way that I engage in this work now. As I've been able to cast further back and beyond Healthy Food Hub, there are also other experiences that I've been able to reflect upon. I was a part of a religious organization early on in Chicago when I arrived here in '99, and that was something that was also very formative in terms of my experiences around community organizing and around engaging with the city and engaging, with complex ideas, engaging with anti-war and anti-nuclear ideas. So all of those things are things that really transformed me into someone who not simply wants to engage in solidarity economy, but really wants to help people translate ideas into ways that are able to be digested by a broad range of people. And so to that extent, I am very invested in both facilitation and pedagogy as ways that I try to communicate these ideas to a broad array of people.
Wow, Mike, what an incredible journey you've been on. I love all the experiences you shared. And I'm curious, through that, being exposed to all these different ways of engaging in solidarity economy, how did you hone in on time banking? I mean, you don't just do time banking, but that has been such a nexus of the intersections of your work. How did that come about?
Yeah, something that people immediately notice about me is that I'm very clear that I don't get here alone. And because I'm very clear that I don't get here alone, I am always clear to credit other people like the Carters and Black Oaks. And so I also cannot claim authorship of my own insights about time banking. I was inspired by someone that I met out of St. Louis, whom I call a friend, Chinyere Esther Ote, who launched something called the Cowrie Collective back in 2000. I want to say Chinyere launched this probably back in about was it about 2008 or 2010? Yes, it was sometime in the early 2000s. But Chinyere launched the Cowrie Collective in St. Louis. And we had a time bank in Chicago before. We had something in Chicago called the Chicago Time Exchange. And Chicago had also way back did have a project of Time Dollar Institute. So Edgar Kahn had done a project in Chicago well before my time. But when I encountered time banking and the way that Chinyere was approaching time banking in St. Louis and how connected it was to ideas of social justice and social change, how connected it was to the grounded needs of Black communities there, and specifically the initial sort of group of folks that were gravitating around time banking with Chinyere were mothers and women who were supporting one another in these networks. And so that was an idea of time banking that really resonated with me. And the Chicago Time Exchange was a noble effort, but it was really connected and grounded in artistic communities. And it had not made the transition to connect with any sort of social movement. And so I was interested in a time bank that could connect to a broader social movement and could connect to broader social ideas. And so that's what led me to try bringing initially a chapter of the Cowrie Collective to Chicago, and then later on just kind of evolving from being a chapter of the Cowrie Collective to being the Kola Nut Collaborative and paying homage to the Cowrie Collective, Cowrie and Kola being just ancient forms of currency, the Kola Nut being a symbol of hospitality and exchange and relationship in West African cultures, and something that, people use as a part of altars and a part of wedding ceremonies and a part of just visiting one another's house. You take a bite of the cola and you take the bitter, and sometimes you might drink some water with it, or you might drink some soda with it. So you're taking the bitter with the sweet. And so those are the things or the specific catalysts that moved me to say, time banking is something that we need. And it was specifically something we needed within the Healthy Food Hub, because we were trying to incentivize people to take over the distribution hubs we were operating. And we did not necessarily have money to do that. So we were trying to test to see if time banking would work to have people take over those distribution hubs. It was an experiment, and it was an experiment that did not end up panning out. But from that experiment, there was a lot of learning that I had that time banking could be applicable elsewhere and could have there were other opportunities in other spaces to use time banking in the same type of way. So that's when I embarked on trying to, one, move time banking in Chicago, and then later really trying to engage with the solidarity economy movement nationally to draw connections and build relationships between time banking and solidarity economy.
Before we go into what you learned in that process, because I really want to know some of your key learnings, I'm thinking some of our listeners might be wondering, why is time banking important? We're trying to change the economy. We need to use money to change the economy. Why is time banking such a significant solution? I'd love your words of this, because obviously lots of people have talked about the importance of time banking, but I'd just love your insights around why time banking in particular is important.
One of the things that I found as I initially learned about time banking, began doing time banking, and then later learned about the solidarity economy and some of the other practices that are present within the solidarity economy, namely cooperatives and community land trusts and participatory budgeting. There are all of these other practices for me that are far more complex to implement. And a time banking, while it does take a level of work and a level of commitment, it is something that is a lot simpler to implement. And it is something that allows people to practice collaboration at a sort of micro level. Before you begin to build on these other projects, you need some of those collaborative skills. You need some of those communication principles that you can build through time banking in order to get to the big projects. As someone who now consults in cooperative development spaces, I recognize that people can try to come together and build a business, but there are certain human skills that they then have to build in order to be able to do that well. And it's those human skills that you want to practice in, a space that is, that is a little bit lower stress, that is a little bit lower tension, an easier experiment, right? And so for me, time banking is really an easier experiment in trying to build some of these skills that we ultimately need in the broader solidarity economy space, and that we ultimately need to move some of these bigger projects. And another thing that I have noticed as a tension as I've engaged in solidarity economy spaces is that there are perhaps people who are engaging in this space who haven't built that collaborative muscle. They've immediately moved to these bigger ideas, and in moving to these bigger ideas, they've bypassed some of the opportunities to connect, the opportunities to build belonging, the opportunities to build relationship that you can experience if you try time banking in your community, and specifically try it on your block. Like, do you have the ability to engage with the person next door and engage with the next 7 people down the way in order to map what assets are in that community and to connect together the people who are doing some of the things that have some shared skills or some complementary skills? And then once we are able to do that, then we develop the muscles we need to move much bigger projects. So for me, that's the importance of time banking. It's a practice space. And the other part of it is that we recognize how challenging it is to change the money system, right? To change the money system, and specifically for communities that have been economically marginalized to access those resources in the money system. And time banking is a way that we can recognize these multiple forms of capital, Appleseed permaculture, the 8 forms of capital: financial, intellectual, living, material, cultural, experiential, social, spiritual. All of these different forms of capital that are available to us. Finance is 1/8 of that. It's a smaller part of that. And so we're ultimately trying to figure out how can we maximize the other forms of capital that are available to us in order to build the lives that we want, to build the communities that we want, to build the world that we want. And then maybe the final thing that I would say just about my personal experience with around time banking, and this gets to something that, Next Economy talks about within the life design space, which is that by practicing time banking in my community and by really doing things like hosting offers and needs market on such a regular basis, I've actually built up my own personal capacity to ask for what I want and to name my own needs, and also to be very clear about what I have to offer when I enter into a space. And so what that allows me to do is it allows me to very easily be able to maneuver in a very different way in some of these spaces, maneuver in a very different way when I have money and then when I don't have money, right? But it allows me to design my life in such a way that it is not centered around just the pursuit of these resources or the pursuit of climbing corporate ladders or things like that. I'm able to seek out opportunities that are much richer and much deeper and much more fulfilling for my entire life that exist beyond money.
So many gems, Mike. Thank you. Wow. I've never heard of it shared in that way. That time banking, for me, one of the ways I'm interpreting your share is time banking is kind of like, playing your scales on a musical instrument before you go to play a symphony. It's like it's the practice.
Absolutely.
And it really makes sense to me, especially when we get into some of these more complex experiences that I've been honored to participate with you in terms of participatory budgeting or even self-set salaries or things that are much more complex in terms of being able to share needs and resources. It makes so much sense that we build those skills first in order to show up more fully at those conversations. Thanks for that. That was really, really helpful. I'm curious what you are most excited about right now in this spaces that you work and operate in.
Yeah, I'm very excited for people who are trying to evolve the spaces that they are working in, organizing within, to bring in some of these values on. So the values that I've talked about on a human level. And so we've got, I am operating currently within Open Collective Foundation, and that's a significant part of my work and my thinking time right now. And what I get to do there is I get to be in conversation with projects about trying to do things like build transparent budgets and trying to figure out how to move from just having the transparent budget to having transparent processes within their organization, to trying to have more dynamic governance mechanisms within their organization. And being able to operate with an Open Collective Foundation, I get to see how projects evolve from a small group of 10 people and begin to grow as projects with these values and what these values change about how they are able to build succession plans, how they're able to manage burnout. So that's a thing that's like really, really core to the work and the thinking that I'm doing right now. But that's not just a thing that's confined to Open Collective Foundation. It's something that I'm seeing as a tendency within organizations in New Economy Coalition, and even New Economy Coalition itself as an organization, being able to evolve what we've called our Govern Ourselves strategy, which is just trying to, as we experiment with these organizational models that are more dynamic, that are less hierarchical, and that allow us to figure out how to self-manage, we're able to share these tools. We're able to share these strategies. And so these communities of practice, whether those are places like Collaborate to Collaborate in the Nonprofit Democracy Network, whether that is spaces like the Peer Advisor Network of the Co-op Clinic and the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, there are all these ways that I see people trying to evolve their practice and trying to emerge into one of the trainings that I do is a 12-week training called Cooperative Culture, but trying to evolve their cooperative culture and then seeing all of the different ways that the world has coached us into non-cooperation and how we can use some of that cultural organizing internal to our organization to move ourselves out of non-cooperation and try to find our way back to better practices and healthier practices. One specific workshop that I've got coming up within the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives Virtual Summit is a training called Here for It, Building Our Capacity for Conflict, which is a collaboration with Ana Martina of Kola Nut Collaborative. And, in that training, Ana Martina and I went through a workshop for the In It Together toolkit. In It Together, a framework for conflict transformation and movement building groups. And from that training, we were able to build our conflict assessment strategies and really gather a set of tools that we can now bring to specifically organizations who are developing worker cooperatives so that they can navigate conflict in healthier ways. And, it's one of the most important skills that we need in these collaborative workplaces and we need in collaborative projects in general, because there is tension and there's conflict and they operate in sort of this yin and yang way, right? Conflict is the sort of the worst spectrum or open conflict, but tension is just, I don't feel comfortable talking about that issue, and I'm not sure I feel comfortable talking with you about that issue. And if we don't know how to navigate tension, we increasingly find ourselves going towards conflict. And so that's a really important study for me this year, is really how to help groups and how to help people think about what conflict is for them, how their body evolves or changes when conflict is engaged, and then how you can navigate through it in healthy ways. Because if we can build our capacity to be together in tension and in conflict, then there's a possibility that, the things that fall apart very often about these collaborative spaces is something that we can diffuse, right? We can diffuse some of those places where projects will fall apart. So between that, those three initiatives that I've named, those are all things that I'm really, really deeply passionate and interested in right now.
Incredible. We could do a whole podcast on each one of those. And just because my interest was sparked when you mentioned conflict, I'm curious if you have resources that you're learning from around holding conflict in generative ways that you would lift up for our listeners.
Absolutely. So I've just talked about the In It Together toolkit. So In It Together, there's a long website, unfortunately, but if you search for In It Together toolkit, you will come across the appropriate website. But that toolkit has in it a set of questions, and it has a set of questions that allow you to diagnose what stage you are in a conflict. And then depending upon what stage you're in a conflict, you can move to later pages of the toolkit and you can find a set of resources specific to that stage of a conflict, right? Is it a conflict because of a lack of information? Are you someone who has power in this situation, right? All of these are things that allow you to assess what level this conflict is at and what resources you might use to navigate forward in that conflict. So that's one key resource that I would say is a really important part of this practice now. The other resource that I've just recently finished reviewing is Turning Toward Each Other, which is a conflict workbook. And Turning Toward Each Other has just it's a really, really valuable resource for what I call, conflict coaching, right? So how do you just do a self-assessment of how you experience conflict personally? The workbook will allow you to actually go through some questions that will dive into your personal experience of conflict and your personal conflict style. And it will help you think how you can engage in a healthy way with other people in conflict. But it also has another side. So it has an interpersonal side, or it has a personal side, and then it has a group side. And so the group side is really just about how you as a group can start talking about conflict in really healthy ways. So In It Together, Turning Toward Each Other. And then finally, I might actually just land on this resource, which is the Right Use of Power Institute. They've got a training on power, and I had an opportunity at the National Conference on Restorative Justice that I was at that conference, and during that conference, there was a training by a member of the Naropa Institute, and they were sharing how they manage conflict intakes at Naropa Institute. And they had a really dynamic intake process where they asked the two parties who were in the conflict questions about what their rank, their role, their status, their power dynamic was inside of the organization before they started asking them about what the conflict was that they were engaging in. Because a really important element of conflict is just understanding, is this conflict a power dynamic issue, meaning that you have a certain sense of your own power dynamic, or you might have sort of power over someone in a situation, and any form of tension with them feels like disrespect to you? Is that how you're reading this conflict? Or is it some other element, right? That's actually at root here. And they require everyone who is entering into their conflict intake to go through some element of this Right Use of Power Institute material, because it allows them to understand their power in a situation and how they might be reading conflict differently depending upon the sort of power that they hold, power, rank, or status that they hold. And so those are three interesting resources. In It Together, Turning Towards Each Other, and then the Right Use of Power Institute as framework around power.
Really incredible resources, Mike. Conflict is something that, like you're describing, can really create meaningful relationships when held in a good space, and we've seen it break apart really amazing institutions and organizations and movement partners doing really important work. So thank you for teaching those workshops and doing the work you do to skill people up and get them prepped for generative conflict. We mentioned earlier in the call that you learned through approaching this time bank with this food hub that you were working with, you learned some things by the fact that it was not easily adopted in that application and form. I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about that story and the lessons you learned through that process.
Yeah, so the experience of the Healthy Food Hub is actually, I would say, a textbook study in the importance of ecosystems. So the Healthy Food Hub is one of these projects that starts all the time, where initially Black Oak Center came to the parent council of Betty Shabazz International Charter School and was in conversation with the parent council and said, hey, there are families here that have specialized diets. we have the ability to source fresh produce from these farmers in Pembroke Township, a historically Black farming community, and we have the ability to access some of these bulk buying programs so that we can get access to some of these foods that these families need right in their community. And the parent council said, that sounds great. Like, that's a great thing. Let's do it. So we initially started with a really small bootstrapped operation, some parents volunteering to staff the buying club, and really just pulling all of our things together on 2 Saturdays a month to bring produce to the school and then be able to set up these distribution days. Now, that operation grew. And as that operation grew, we experienced that what we were trying to do was a bit overwhelming for such a small team. So we had folks at Black Oaks who were running the production farm. We had folks at Black Oaks who were aggregating some of the produce from the farms into warehouse space, into fridges in the city. And then we had to actually run the distribution hub. And so all of that was an overwhelming challenge for an operation that is not corporate. It was just people trying to meet a need. And so we tried to evolve that project different times. We started looking at cooperative models and said, hey, we think this could be a cooperative. At the time in Chicago, around sort of the 2008 period, there were no real cooperative ecosystem support mechanisms in Chicago. There wasn't anyone who was training on cooperatives. There wasn't anyone who was helping people understand how to form cooperatives. And the one opportunity for a conference that arrived here, which was when Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimhard spoke around 2010-ish, that kind of came and went. And so the experience of the Healthy Food Hub is an experience of trying to grapple for some of these ecosystem elements of the solidarity economy and not being able to find them. And so when we tried to introduce something like time banking into the Healthy Food Hub, well, there is a lot of cultural changes that have to happen there. There's a cultural change of trying to get people to understand time banking, and then there's a cultural change of trying to get volunteers to use the time bank to bank their hours and be able to spend them elsewhere within the city. So all of those things are retraining things that have to happen in their own lane. Like, you have to do one training at a time. We talk about it in the offers and needs market training as parallel processing, right? And so we were trying to get people to do all of these parallel processes exactly at the same time. And it was overwhelming, right? And so we weren't able to really do a good job of introducing time banking there. And that's why that experiment did not necessarily pan out. The other side of my learnings around time banking in general was that when I initially spun off and started taking time banking out into the city, I initially did some presentations like Time Banking 101 that were lecture format. I had, probably 60 slides in there. Some of those slides were about monetary theory. And, I talked about the Yap Islands where there's a big rock that they roll around to represent money. And so all of these things were things that did not actually get at the point of what I wanted people to experience of time banking, which is that I just want you to understand that, like, time banking can be a way that you can connect with someone else and that you can get your needs met without money. And I wasn't doing that by offering that presentation. And so around 2019, when I finally did discover the offers and needs market as a practice and as a process, that was when I began to experiment with that as a model of getting people engaged in the practice of time banking right in a room that they're in with the people that are there in that room. And then ultimately, if you leave and you never come to another collaborative orientation, you at least have the experience in your body that you know what it means to speak about your values, speak about your value, and then be able to exchange and connect with another person around what you have to offer and then what you need from people in that room. So ultimately, the learning that I've gathered from that is that it's really important that we think about, as we are building these spaces with these complex ideas, people have to have an embodied experience of the exchange, or otherwise it won't be very memorable. And if they forget it when they leave, then we haven't done the work to actually popularize the idea or make revolution irresistible. We haven't done the work to make revolution irresistible if people leave and they don't have it in their bodies.
Whew, I'm feeling a little left out here over in San Francisco and Bay Area. It's such an incredible resource that you offer to the Chicago community, and every community needs something like this. So thank you so much for building that embodied experiential knowledge for people and helping them experience and get a taste of what it's like, to have a whole new relationship to needs and resources. And there's so many directions to go. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you really struggle with? Sort of your analysis of like the 2 to 3 things that keep you up at night in this work that are big challenges.
Well, I'll name one thing that's very immediate in mind that I was talking to my partner and some other folks about, is that decision fatigue is real, and I recognize that, like, as we move towards this space where we're trying to develop self-management inside of our organizations and inside of our communities, it is very challenging to make big decisions all throughout your day and then, come home at night and try to figure out what to make for dinner. And so we do need to figure out a way to really build a level of balance in how we are creating these structures so that people are not immediately overwhelmed and turn these ideas down because they are really challenged to do them. It's a muscle, and it's a muscle that you have to build consistently and cultivate. And if your first year is spent, making these massive decisions and really being like challenged to have any energy to do anything else, then you won't stay with this movement for long. And so decision fatigue and overwhelm are really, really on my heart and on my mind right now, as is conflict. The reason that I'm engaging in studying conflict this year is because I have experienced navigating and mediating conflicts that show up in projects that are hosted by OCF. I've experienced, conflict in some of my own projects that I've had to navigate. And so I am really trying to understand my own capacity and my own ability to navigate tension, my own ability to understand power dynamics and how they show up. And so that's something that really keeps me awake at this moment in study. And it used to keep me awake in worry, but now it keeps me awake in just learning and studying some of the best practices. And finally, I am really trying to understand how we popularize the vision for another generation. I myself have a daughter of 20, and I will soon be a grandfather in July. And there are elements of what I do that my daughter, does not necessarily understand and does not even care to understand. And there's an autonomy there that I have to relinquish as a parent that says like, hey, this is your life. And it is, and, you will find the ideas that are irresistible to you in time. But, how do we popularize the vision that we are working through for another generation who is struggling with all sorts of dynamics and forms of oppression, who is struggling to kind of navigate just the everyday life of being, a young person in this world, and be able to translate and communicate that vision in a way that they feel like they can take hold of and that they can carry on in ways that are unique to them, right? So it will not look how I think it should look, but it will look how they want it to look. And so that's a third thing that I'm really thinking through all the time.
Well, congratulations on becoming a soon-to-be grandfather. That's exciting. And so you've given such a wealth of resources throughout this whole conversation that we will link to in the show notes. But how do listeners give back to you? How do they support your work? How do they get registered for your workshops coming up? And how can they support what you're doing?
Yes, I would say that you can drop into kolanutcollab.org, KOLANUTCOLLAB.org. That is the website of the Kola Nut Collaborative, and you can learn more there about time banking. We've shared some resources and toolkits there that will allow you to potentially, have a conversation about time banking in your community. You can also drop into the website of Post Growth Institute, and specifically they have a website devoted to the offers and needs market. Offers and Needs. I don't know if it's .com at the moment, but you can drop into the website of the Offers and Needs Market. We will be hosting trainings in the fall. So we'll have a basic training for, those who are just becoming acquainted with the Offers and Needs Market. And for those who have already been through a basic training, they will get a notification that there's an advanced training coming up in that same period. So that's between October and November that we'll be hosting those trainings. So join a training of the Offers and Needs Market. It's a really great skill for any type of community organizing that you might be doing. And then I would also say visit the website of Open Collective Foundation, opencollective.foundation. You can learn more about some of the things that we are doing within Open Collective Foundation. You can read our blog and hear about that salary setting process that we are navigating and our attempts to move through distributed leadership. So those are some key resources that I think I can share with everyone that might help you tap in.
Amazing. And I'm thinking, gosh, with our MBA alumni, we should do an Offers and Needs Market. So we can put a pin in that.
You called it.
Any other ways to support you? You're consistently giving more and more wealth of resources out, but are there ways to donate to your work? Other things that our listeners could do to give back to your work?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can certainly donate to the Kola Nut Collaborative on Open Collective. We are a fiscally sponsored project of Open Collective Foundation. So if you go to opencollective.com/Kola Nut Collab, KOLANUT you can reach the donation tiers and you can give into our work. There are some tiers there that are honorific in nature, so you can just kind of donate at any rate or any amount. Donating there supports some of the programs that we are trying to move forward in Chicago. Specifically right now, there's a small group that's trying to revive something that we did in 2018, which was the Cooperative Economy Summit. And we're hoping to, do something similar in this year, whether or not we call it by that name. But the Kola Nut Collaborative has committed to fund at least $5,000 for that gathering. So if you want to support any of the work that's happening in Chicago, we support work around the solidarity economy and around time banking offers and facilitating Offers and Needs Market in the city. You can definitely give to the project on the Open Collective platform there.
As we wrap up our conversation, I would love to hear if you have any last words to share with our listeners here today.
The favorite type of game that I love to play is conversational. So my favorite current game is called Where Should We Begin, which is a story game by Esther Perel. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do wherever you are is start a conversation about nothing and see where it goes. And if you are struggling to start a conversation about nothing, there are some wonderful games that you can pick up, like Where Should We Begin, like Healthier Conversations, like We're Not Really Strangers, to help you spark a conversation with someone you have not met. And so start a conversation.
Incredible. Mike, thank you so much for joining this conversation and taking the time out of your busy schedule to share what you're learning with our listeners. It's been such an honor, such a treat.
Thank you very much, Erin. It's been great being in conversation with you.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.